Huh. Okay, and welcome to week 12 of the basic television class. And today we are going to fill in just a little bit of a gap that has little to do with the editing technology we've been talking about, but it's something I do think we need to talk about now, especially for those of you who were not able to participate in the live show. I wanted to talk a little bit about traditional live television. Because chances are, when you work in this field, at some point, you will have to participate in this. And I want you to have some idea what to expect and what some of the terminology is, because that can be useful. So, studio and multi-camera protocols. That's basic personnel and terminology. Now, to recap what we've talked about already, we've talked about single camera EFP or ENG. Now remember, EFP is electronic field production. That is when you go to a location, set up a camera, usually one, not necessarily always one, but usually at least one. You have a microphone, typically concealed, and you basically record something, whether it's a dramatic recording or an interview or something like that. And basically you leave with the footage and later you edit it. Now ENG is a similar process, but usually it's more quick and dirty, although I hate to use that term, because you can see the equipment usually. You're not pretending it isn't a video shoot. And so that is more typical of what happens during the news. And usually these are not done live, although hypothetically they could be in some cases. Now single camera dramatic shooting typically requires you to shoot each scene more than once for each camera angle. So if you're using a single camera, you may shoot the scene more than one time, of course. Or if it's electronic news gathering, typically you wouldn't. Now multi-camera can be aired at the same time it's shot. It can be basically produced live, and it is typically treated as if that's what's going on, meaning that if you're doing a multi-camera shoot, even if you're not broadcasting, you're acting as though you are. Because the idea is to get it all in one take, and usually you will tolerate mistakes. So a multi-camera shoot is either live or live on tape, and it's not really a shoot, it's a show. We'll call it a show because that's a slightly different approach. The show must go on. If it's a shoot, you can do the shoot again. You know, if you flub, you go back and fix it. If it's a show, when the show starts, when it's showtime, everybody's got to be doing their best. And if something goes by, it goes by. Okay, multi-camera documents events, typically. Like, for example, when we did the art discussion, in the gallery, that was an event. That was something that was seen by other people, and it was, in fact, aired live, which is a milestone for us because that was the first time we'd ever used that feature. And multi-camera requires more staff and equipment, as you saw, meaning that obviously if it's multi-camera, you've got more cameras, but you also have to have some kind of a switcher to manage all that, some kind of a separate recording device, and you've got to have other things as well, intercom systems, and so all of that has to be done in an organized fashion. And generally, multi-camera work is done in a studio environment, but it can be done remotely. Now, just to let you know, we typically, we'll go 3 ways. First of all, something like MU reports, the anchor shoots, those are done multi-camera, and that is done in a completely controlled studio environment. That is how a lot of television is produced, typically live television. Now, you could also do it remotely. Now, the way we did it was a little bit quick and dirty, meaning that we drove or we walked to the scene, set up everything, and basically walked back. Now, if you were doing this on a regular basis, you might have something like a production van or something like that, where the control room would already be set up inside a vehicle. So the television news programs typically have a van of some kind which goes on the scene, and they can basically run multi-camera work from there, and that becomes their control room. I've worked in such setups before, and they're very nice. Let's talk a bit about personnel. Now, first of all, one of the things that we often overlook is the producer. And you might have heard that term before, producer, associate producer, but I want to make sure that we are clear on what a producer is, because that sometimes gets confused with the director. They're very different positions. Now, a producer is not necessarily involved with the creative aspects of the program. In fact, they may not even be on the set. You may never actually meet the producer, but you probably will talk to them on the phone. And so they handle all the logistics. If you have a producer, the job of the producer is to hire people and to make sure that everything works. They make sure the project happens. Now, if you hear the term associate producer, this is kind of important for you guys because you may be approached with this. Someone says, we need an associate producer. Do you want the job? Well, before you say yes, know something about what the job is. A producer makes things happen. An associate producer is someone who they tell to make things happen. So you may say, we need to investigate this particular area. We need to do a site survey. You're on it. And so your job may be to go to some place you've never seen before, take pictures, find out what the electricity is like and stuff like that. May not be a glamorous job, but if you are in with the producer, you can end up getting more work and it can become a career. Now, that's if that's what you want to do, but it isn't always creative. Okay, the producer can also be the director. That's why it gets confusing, because sometimes the shoot or the show is just not big enough for both of these positions. So if you want to do a video project and you want to be the director, because that's usually what you think of, you may have to be your own producer. And I once worked with someone who basically said, I hate doing producing work, but that's part of the job. And so making phone calls, getting things ready, that's producing work as a producer. The director does the creative stuff. Now the director, they control all creative aspects of the show. Now, if we're talking about a single camera show, they may work on the script, they may write the shooting script, they're going to be on location. They may be the camera operator, but not necessarily. They may have a camera operator they work with, but they handle all the creative aspects. Now, in a live show, they're calling the shots. They set up and call the shots. You ever hear the expression, I call the shots around here? Well, that's a directing term. And so basically when the director says, ready camera one, take one, that means that the technical director hits that button and one is on the air. And so the director gets the final say. The director also communicates with the talent and the camera operators. They must supervise everything. And they have the final say in everything. Now, you may think, wow, that's a wonderful job. Well, it's a very stressful job, especially if you are doing live work. If you're doing something that's not necessarily creative, like the news, for example, that can be a very stressful job because your product depends on other people following your commands and knowing what to do. And the director has to get everybody ready to get this thing working. They can't just say, do it, folks, and then walk away. It's actually a very difficult job, and it does pay very well. Okay, the assistant director. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't have the luxury of having an assistant director, but if you do, they can be very useful. And a long time ago, when I was in graduate school, seems like yesterday to me, but it was a long time ago, my teacher, I believe he made up this term. He said the assistant director provides a heat shield for the director. And I have used it ever since because it is that good. So basically what that means is the director's got to supervise everything. It's physically impossible for the director to be everywhere at once. And so the assistant director will field certain questions. Someone says, well, what about the costumes? And the assistant director will step in and say, let's talk about that. And then they'll guide them away from the director who's doing something else. And so that's really the purpose of the assistant director. They generally work in the studio if the director's in the control room, because in a live show, the director leaves the studio and goes into the control room. They usually start in the studio, they work their way in. And once they're in the control room, they're blocking shots, they're on the headsets, they're talking to the people about video sources. Once they're in there, they don't want to come out. And you don't want them to come out because the studio is like another planet. In fact, in some cases, they may be in a different area of the building. And so, or even in a different building altogether. So the assistant director will often be there making sure everything in the studio stays okay while the director is blocking the shots. And so that can be a very important role. And the assistant director is delegated all matters when the director is occupied. Very simple thing. Now, the other thing, which a lot of people don't necessarily know, is that the assistant director controls the timing of the show. And so the reason they do that is because the director can't think of everything. So the director's looking at the shots, ready camera one, take one, and they are following what the show is doing. And the assistant director will be looking at the clock. And if there's a commercial coming up, the assistant director will whisper to the director, 5 minutes to commercial, just so the director knows about where they are in the show, because it's very easy to lose track of time. And so that's what the assistant director is there to do. They hit the start button on the timer, and then they follow it as they go along. And that's not an easy job, by the way. Also, I'm going to tell you, embarrassingly enough, the few times I served as assistant director, it's not impossible to forget to hit the button on the timer. And so if you don't know what time it is, then you got to look at the clock. Okay, we've been on for 2 minutes so far, and that can be very embarrassing. So if you're ever in that position, take it seriously. Okay, the technical director is another one of those positions a lot of people don't necessarily think about, and that is the person who operates the switcher. That's basically what they do. And so when the director says ready one, they have to know to hit the green number 1 on the ready bus so that camera 1 shows up in the preview window. And when the director says take it or take one, the technical director will hit the take button, and then it'll flip-flop the buttons. And so what was on the preview is now on air, what was on air is now on preview, and they'll go from there. So they operate the switcher during productions. They may be an engineer. They may have to do wiring if necessary, although probably not during the show. And they also may do other things like operate the teleprompter, and they will function as the videotape operator or the recording operator. So they'll make sure that the show is being recorded, because if it isn't, that's a really embarrassing thing. Okay, and so the technical director sets up the shots at the director's command, and they manage their roll-in and graphics. And so if you got a commercial coming up, they'll have that ready, and they'll have graphics like titles and stuff. And so basically they're operating the TriCaster. And so they have to know how to do those things, and they have to know what's going to be expected of them during the show in order for them to do it, because it's actually a relatively difficult job. Now, your audio engineer, you would think would be just as difficult, but honestly, it doesn't have to be, but it can be. So first of all, obviously the audio engineer sets up and coordinates audio sources. Usually they're setting up the microphones. Now, the reason why that's important to know is that if you're the audio engineer, you should know which microphone is going into which bus on the audio mixer. You should know that. And so if you don't, then you're moving up the sliders. Does it sound any better? No. And so ideally, if you're the one setting up the microphone, you set up microphone 1, and you make sure that's coming in on number 1 on the mixer board. And then same thing with the other ones. In fact, you can even put a little piece of masking tape there and write that down, or other things. They have them now that are digital. You can just type in your little notations, and it's perfect. So wonderful thing. You can also hypothetically queue up external audio sources if you have something that's coming in that isn't part of the TriCaster system. Relatively rare these days, but it used to be the audio engineer had a tape deck, what used to be called a cart, which was kind of a glorified 8-track tape player, and other things. And they manage levels during productions. And so if somebody starts getting loud, they would bring down their microphone. And if for some reason a microphone dies, they would bring up some microphone that's nearby to make up for it. So that's what the audio engineer would do. Now, the camera operators are in a very interesting position, or rather lack of interesting position. Basically, they operate the camera. They listen for the director's commands, they set up shots in anticipation, and that's it. So if you really love camera work, this isn't necessarily the way to do it, although some people do enjoy it. Basically, I have an image here of a studio camera, and you can see most of it there. A studio camera, a very large camera, not the sort of thing you'd want to carry into the field. Instead of the viewfinder being on the side, it's behind, so you're standing behind the camera. You're operating the lens controls with a hand device over here, and you're just doing what the director tells you to do. And you could be in the shot that's the two shot, where you're just basically staring at the screen the whole time. You never know. Okay, the floor manager, they're the ones that communicate with the talent. They're basically telling the talent what to do, but they're not using words, they're using hand signals, because they obviously can't speak in the studio because the talent's on hot mics, and so basically they're using hand gestures. So stretch it out, wrap it up, and if the director says 5 minutes into the show, if the director says 1 minute into the show, or 1 minute left in the show, if the director says 30 seconds, that's 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and then that sort of thing. And they also may use other commands, whatever it is that they have agreed on ahead of time. And so that's what they do. They stand near the cameras. They point the talent to the the camera that you're supposed to talk into. Cue talent means you're on, and this camera, that sort of thing. And so that's how the floor manager works. They also manage the studio during setup, and so generally they're always in the studio. Now the teleprompter operator obviously operates a teleprompter, which could be the technical director, generally not. I wouldn't think this the assistant director. That may be a job that they do if there's no one else, but essentially it's just there. It controls the speed during the show. If you turn the dial faster, people will talk faster or slower, etc. And maybe the assistant director. And basically that's it. Now the one position that isn't mentioned here is production assistant. That's basically what you're likely to do first, where basically you do anything they tell you to do. It's really not fun, and it doesn't pay all that well. But some people start out with that. Okay, talent. Talent is the only visible part of the team. The talent controls the show with the director's command. So if the host is having a conversation with the guest, they're controlling how that interview goes. That's how that works. And so if the show has to end, the host has to end it. And so they will coach the guest on what to do, and the floor manager will communicate that to them. And so they do their thing, but they have to fit the format. Now, the director generally uses a series of commands. Now, they've changed over the years, and some of them are antiquated, but they're still there. So we're going to go over a few of these things because I want you to understand the terminology. So the first command that the director may say is quiet on the set. And so it could be they're talking through a bullhorn, or they're talking into an intercom system, or they're talking on headsets. Quiet on the set, ready studio, ready control room, ready on audio, ready on video. And that simply means everybody get ready, let's go. And so if whatever job it is that you're doing, get ready to do it. And start recording might be one way of saying this. They used to say roll tape. I still would probably say roll tape, even though we're not using tape. And it's important to understand the ready command. Ready does not mean do it. Ready means get ready to do it. And the reason why they would say that is they want to make sure there's some sort of acknowledgement. And within the control room, the person whose job it is to do that must answer back. Kind of like working on a submarine. Up periscope, that sort of thing. That's how it goes. And so the technical director may roll the tape, so that the director may say, ready to roll tape, ready, roll tape, tape is rolling. And that's how that goes. So they're talking to the technical director, or hypothetically, you could have someone whose job is just to push the record button, which could be a very important job, of course. Give me speed, no longer necessary. If you want to look old, say give me speed. What that basically means is you wait 5 seconds and say you got speed. What that means is if you're rolling actual tape, the first few seconds of the tape are all dirty. And so you basically want clean tape. And so you let the tape run for a few minutes to make sure that when you go to play it back, you've got good stock. And so if you're using a digital recorder, it doesn't matter. Although I have found out that with some digital equipment, there's a lag between when you start and when it actually records. And so it's not unheard of that you would give it 5 seconds before you start. So you could use the speed command if you really want to. Ready camera 2, and so that means that the technical director hits the number 2 button on the preview bus, and that's ready. Ready music, open mics, and so the audio engineer get ready to bring up the music. Maybe they would open mics at that point, maybe they'd just be ready to. Fade up on 2, play music, open mics, all those people doing all those things. And so they may not have to answer that command verbally, but they will respond. Fade music, cue talent. So cue talent, that's for the technical, for the floor manager, cue talent. And so the show starts. During the show, ready camera 1, take 1, ready camera 2, take 2, ready camera 3, take 3, and like that. Ready to bring in laugh track, all of those different possible things. Now it could also be signal the talent 5 minutes to commercial. Could be that's what you're doing. Ready to roll in. You got a commercial roll in coming in. Signal talent 1 minute to commercial. Bring in commercial, close mics. And so you would bring the mics down so that the people in the studio can go, oh my gosh, what a crazy director, that sort of thing, and no one hears it on the air. And so then, of course, ready to roll credits at the end. That would be the technical director running the graphics. The credits are rolling over whatever. And fade to black. And so then basically you would put in black on the switcher, fade out. You bring down the audio, and then you're done. You say stop recording, it's a wrap. And so those are just those are the majority of the commands that you're going to run into as a director. There can be others. There can be new ones. All of those possibilities. So why are we going over this? Just because I thought you should understand how multi-camera studio work operates, because you very well may want to do that at some point. And so parts of this can and will be covered in the final exam.